so many people want to talk about the impact of spanking, corporal punishment, as something very different than the impact of abuse as it's kind of traditionally understood. Today, this idea of, quote, spanking in love or doing it in a loving way, the child is trying to sort out what the heck is going on here, because the person that I trust, the person that I'm supposed to be connected to, is hurting me, telling me it's for my good.
Hey guys, it's Angela with the Angela Rose Show, where we unveil stories of religious abuse. Today we're gonna go over the impact of corporal punishment. And this is a subject that is really close to my heart. And I'm honored to have my friend Matt with us today. Matt has a history of working in mental health recovery and has a lot of both experience and education around corporal punishment. And Matt, I really look up to your both experience and educative insights that you share with this subject. So I'm very honored to have you with us today.
Yeah, it's really good to be here. Thanks, Angela.
Yeah. So I thought it'd be fun to just start out and have you introduce yourself, your family, a little bit of what you do for your work.
Yeah. And again, thanks so much for having me. So I am married with two boys. My wife, Kendra, is from the U.S., so we're a blended family in that sense. Canadian-American crew. I'm the only one that doesn't carry two passports. And so, that's us. It's a really fun time. 7 and 3 is fun ages for the boys.
Okay, there's 7 and 3.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The exact same age as my two boys.
Oh, I guess I didn't even know that. Yeah. Amazing. It's super cool. Yeah, same kind of age difference between you two. Yeah. So that's been, that, as you know, that takes up all the time that you're not working, essentially, is being with family, right? My 7-year-old's playing 3-pitch and my 3-year-old's just being 3, so it's really fun. Yeah, and then work. So kind of who I am in terms of, like you described in the opening, I'm a mental health worker and have been since college. I guess I can start before that with my bio really quick. Grew up in a conservative Mennonite family on a dairy farm in the middle of the country. I say it's like pretty much a country song. We were on a gravel road, a dirt road as they call it in the States. Surrounded by the cows and the corn, So that was growing up, and we might get into more of that in the show. But and then met Kendra, and around that same time I was in college, studying to be a child and youth worker, as it's called up here. And I ended up in child and adolescent mental health in an inpatient unit at the hospital that I'm still at, providing support to clients who had been admitted. And these clients are anywhere between age 6 to 18, admitted for things like depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, eating disorders, kind of the whole gamut. Working with a multidisciplinary team like psychiatrists, social workers, nurses, teachers to provide support. And
so do you basically bridge the gap? Like you hear the case and then you point them to the resource that you sense is the need. Is that what your position would be?
Mm-hmm. That's my position now. Yeah, because I'm an outpatient now. We are kind of the short-term stabilization outpatient team that helps support them back into the community. So just for example, let's say a 13-year-old female comes in, suicidal ideation, maybe even an attempt. They're on the inpatient unit for a couple weeks, and then they get discharged. And part of their discharge plan is our service. So we're providing some short-term counseling, maybe communicating with their school, connecting them to caseworkers in the community, maybe getting them set up with long-term therapy in the community. So that's a part of what we do in the outpatient team.
That's amazing. Like as you know, I'm so passionate about mental health. So, with mental illness in my family, like that work is so close to my heart. So I'm like, wow. Yeah. I could ask questions about that all day. Sure.
We did a whole podcast on that, right?
Yeah, we could.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my kind of professional work. That's my And then my secondary work, as you asked, is the coaching, which is supporting clients more from our communities that we grew up in, from our conservative, not all Mennonite, but conservative Christian communities who are dealing with wide variety of issues, mental health. Often it's adverse childhood experiences, which we're talking about today, and then providing support and healing from that in that work. So that's part two.
Yeah. Wow. That's really good. Yeah, we'll probably be diving into most of what that often looks like within the communities that we stem from here with corporal punishment. So let's talk. Well, first of all, I want to just say, like, to our audience, I think today's conversation is really going to be for folks from all different cultures and backgrounds, and you will find it to be very relatable, the discussion of the child violence and impact of corporal punishment, even if you didn't come from a religious community. Matt and I both share a similar story in the sense we come from a similar religious background, but today's conversation will enlighten those of you who didn't come from religion and also were impacted by child physical violence and some of the complex process that causes. I hope that today's conversation just really awakens clarity and is a mirror, from some of what we have to share, a mirror that can help you all in your process to uncover the pieces of what could be potentially stemming from this harm. So today's subject is going to be geared towards children, and we're here to advocate for the children and what a child experiences. Yeah. So Matt, I really want to dive into that with what I want to start out with, like, what does corporal punishment look like on a child's development and some of that process?
Yeah, impact on development. I think we need to start with just the simple fact that the research, ever since research has been done on this, has been pretty much by and large saying impact is negative. Right? That spanking, hitting children in any capacity does not have any kind of positive outcome. There's a study here and there that might be an outlier, right? As there is kind of in all research, where someone might say, it's actually neutral, or it actually doesn't have a lot of impact. But by and large, if you kind of look at any study that's been done, the impact is negative. And in some cases, we're talking more than negative. We're talking about trauma. We're talking about significant adverse impact. The one study that I always kind of think about is a really new study. It was done in 2021 by Harvard. And they basically said kids who were spanked in the kind of controlled environment, so spanking as in the parent wasn't out of control, they weren't losing their mind on them, it wasn't violent abuse, their brain scans look similar to a child who was abused in that way, in kind of more, quote, serious forms of maltreatment.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I think that is profound in terms of those findings. I know it's one study, but I think it's an important study, and I think it's one that makes people uncomfortable. Because as we're going to get to, I think so many people want to talk about the impact of spanking, corporal punishment, as something very different than the impact of, abuse as it's kind of traditionally understood.
Right.
And so, yeah. And so I would just really start out by saying the impact of spanking, corporal punishment on kids, the peer-reviewed research has been telling us for decades, don't do it. Pediatricians come on shows, they say don't do it. Anyone who's working in child development is saying don't do it. It's not good for development. It harms things like attachment. It harms things like connection, which is part of attachment. It can lead.
Dive into that a little bit, like due to let's bring up like a 3-year-old child attaching to mom or dad, right? Like giving people a little picture of what attachment looks like, and then how would physically hitting that child negatively impact this attachment bond of trust with mom or dad?
Yeah, that's a good question. And when you think about what attachment is, it is our biological need to attach to our caregiver, to the person who gave us life, essentially. I think it's Gabor Mate who talks about how you come into the world looking for connection. You think about when your boys were born, and I think about being in the room when my boys were born, and they kind of have the baby there, and they're like looking for mom, right? It's like looking to be put on mom. And he talks about the first thing you're looking for when you come into the world is the loving gaze of a caregiver, right? And that's attachment. You're looking for that. You kind of, that's the first thing. And so when you think about that biological need to attach to mom or dad, you think about physical violence then happening. So in what we're talking about today, this idea of, quote, spanking in love or doing it in a loving way, the child is trying to sort out what the heck is going on here, because the person that I trust, the person that I'm supposed to be connected to, is hurting me and telling me it's for my good. And somehow that child's brain and body has to figure that out. And so they have to connect to that caregiver in some way. So maybe normalizing the process, thinking about ways to disassociate in those processes, or a range of other things that happen. And so that's where so much harm happens in terms of attachment, because the child has to attach, and they have to attach during this very terrible moment of physical punishment. And so the impacts are long-ranged. Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to ask, you mentioned anxious attachment.
Yeah.
Have you read, is there any study on, specific, is there a variety of, there's anxious, avoidant, all the different attachments. I'm an anxious attachment major. Yeah, but my husband's an avoidant, and I love attachments. So we could do another podcast.
So cool. Yeah, totally could.
Have you done any studies or heard, seen the research on is that a colorful array of does that depend from each home parent more than corporal punishment has the statistic of that you're going to be anxious or not? You know what I mean?
Sure.
One way or another.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't seen, I think there could be probably a whole textbook written on that, and there is probably something somewhere. Yes, the research talks about attachment for sure, and the negative impact on attachment from spanking and corporal punishment. To your question, whether or not the more spanking, the more anxious, or is that direct correlation? I'm not sure. I'm not sure if there's research there directly to that. I think I could just say from personal experience or anecdotally that definitely, because it is impacting attachment, there is going to be different ways in which your attachment is impacted by spanking. They're just,
absolutely.
I don't see how not.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
One way or another, the attachment is impacted. How we all respond, whether we become avoidant or anxious, is very different often depending on our home and our family attachment.
Yeah, and I think what happens is people's bodies and nervous systems, and we'll get to this, but they are responding differently to the abuse. And so one person might be moving toward the avoidant attachment because that's how they can cope with it. Another person is more anxious based on the way in which their body is experiencing it, right? And then your attachment style kind of forms in those experiences.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What are other things you see with the corporal punishment, with small children? What's a messaging that a child experiences by the impact, even if the adult maybe didn't have that intent?
Yeah.
That makes
so
sense.
Kind of the message that corporal punishment is sending to the child, to the little person. Yeah, I think that what I think is important to remember about spanking corporal punishment is that it's a non-consensual form of violence against the child, right? And so the messaging that's happening, particularly in religious communities, and this is speaking more to the religious side of spanking, is that this is happening to you because this is what love looks like and this is what God looks like. because I'm doing this because God told me to. And so really your first physical experience of God, embodied experience, is one of pain, because this is what God does to people who don't stay in line. There's different scripts in Christian parenting material that'll say things like, you should say to your kid, God is going to punish me if I don't punish you. And so, I got to punish you because he's up there, he's watching. And so the messaging in that is profound, because it's really your kid's first experience with God. Not only is it first experience with God, it's your first experience of how your parent experiences God. And so it's this big mess of trying to understand it. So that's one profound message that I think happens to kids in religious homes, in high control religious homes with spanking.
I would say from that process, when I was a child, in my own experience, my view of God at a very early age was that he was out to get me. And I do credit that belief, that core belief of what was established in my child view of God, to be from that physical violence that, would happen multiple times a day. It wasn't called abuse or violence. It was called spanking.
Yeah.
So I thought it was good, right?
Good language for it.
My mom and dad were good people. They were Christians, and we serve this good God. And so how could I define spankings to be bad?
Right.
I just thought I must be chronically bad, and that eventually it would, I thought eventually if I got spanked enough, I would turn to goodness. Like, that's what my genuine child heart hoped, that they were spanking my badness out, because I was bad, and then I would turn good, right? And like that, that's totally theory I had personally. And as an adult, obviously I have different perspectives, but like, that was a huge core belief in my child heart. And I would say to this day, just vulnerably speaking as an adult, that child still lives within me, and I can still fear that you're out to get me. Like, if you would confront me with something, I can have a trusting relationship towards you. Like, we have established, and even if you would confront me about something well-meaning, sometimes I think my nervous system's like, it starts to be like, what did I do? Am I going to be the bad guy? It's like a nervous system response to when I was, I was violated for doing the wrong.
Absolutely. And it's a body memory, right? And so you are, like, you're not, hopefully, most of the time, that person's not going to hit you. But your body is linking that kind of confrontation with physical violence, right? Because when you disappointed someone as a kid, when you made when that person came to you in confrontation, they were not just coming to like work something through with you. They were coming to hurt you and to physically impose themselves on you without your consent. So here we are as adults trying to work through confrontation in a way that's, both sides come to the table and you walk through something. Little Matt and little Angela don't have that language. Like, what does that mean, right? It's more about somebody bigger and stronger makes their point. In love, of course.
Just talking about this, literally, I feel reduces some of the pressure and shame I put on myself so often now as an adult, when like struggling to have these, healthy adult conversations, and some of the responses I have, it really reduces the shame, knowing, I didn't have that modeled. I didn't have the opportunity to have a voice in this, say, I was dominated with violence before I had a chance to speak.
100%. Yeah.
Crazy.
And it gives so much more language to our adult selves struggling with confrontation, with being assertive, which having the ability to speak into issues without fear of, violence. And I think if we're talking about high control religions, there's an element here which is just even being a woman for you in these communities, right? We have the violence piece, and then we have the fact that just your femininity in and of itself is a threat. And so
Right.
that is part two, which isn't what this podcast is this one is about, but I think that's
Good
playing out
point.
too.
Yeah, that'd be another good one. Oh, how many podcasts we need on these subjects. They are deep. What do you have to say about the sexual component of spanking?
Yeah. Yeah, this one's intense. And I think so a couple things. One is it is my own story, and I'll sell that story, and it's really why I got into this work. I grew up in a home where honestly, like I love my parents, and they were, for all intents and purposes, following the model of everyone else around them in this high control Mennonite world that I grew up in. And my home was not out of the ordinary in any way. In fact, some of the homes around me, it was probably even more intense in terms of the way corporal punishment was used. But I got passionate about this, and I'm here today partly because that was my experience. I had not only was I, feeling the effects of corporal punishment in the ways that I think a lot of people do, but I had also experienced, sexual arousal, sexual confusion from it. And of course, I didn't say that out loud for a long time. Who the heck wants to talk about that out loud? But with some really good therapy, some life events, some work that I started doing on my own research, that kind of thing, I decided, you know what, I think we really got to start talking about this. And wildly, around the time, which was just, I don't know, maybe 3 years ago, that I started going public and starting to have conversations about it, is really when people started talking about it. I mean, it's always been there as like this in the shadows of this conversation. You'll find some online communities that have been talking about it for a while. I think of one called Homeschoolers Anonymous that I found a long time ago, which was people coming out of these kind of fundamentalist circles being like, there was a lot of spanking and there was sexual components to it, and we haven't talked about it. So anyway, it's been there really from the dawn of time. If you look back at old literature about the way that the Romans used physical violence against slaves and stuff like that, there was even writing and ways in which it was mixed with erotica, and the way in which it could be a very sexually humiliating punishment. Strip your slave, beat them naked in public, and masters are liking it, So it's never been completely not talked about. It's just always been uncomfortably in the shadows.
Right.
But I think the reality is that spanking, beating, and in particular when it's ritualized, which is the way in which a lot of Christian parenting manuals talk about it, it has even more possibility to become sexual for that child. This kind of ritual that honestly looks kind of like the rituals that you would find in adult sexual content of, okay, we're going to go through these rituals. There's going to potentially be even removing of clothes, things like that, which can lead to it being a sexualized experience for the child. And I think the key here is it's not even, it doesn't even have to be intentional on behalf of the parent. And in fact, most times it's not. They have no idea that that's what's happening for the little person. So I think that's one part, is the kind of ritual. And then the second is just the biological aspect that majority of spanking is done on the butt, which is and can be an erogenous zone. And when that's hit, there's arteries in there that are connected to your genitals, and that can just lead to biological arousal through that impact. And that's in the research, right? You can find that in
Absolutely.
books and in the, yeah. So
And it's so validating because there is such a cry today of so many confused kids and adults coming from specifically high demand religious settings where it was a ritual more than just, I'm talking multiple times a day. This is what God has for us. This is how we child train. I mean, there's a lot to unpack here.
so much.
We have generations of kids who Some have been sexually aroused, some have not. You and I share different stories in this. Personally, I want to share in short, I responded the opposite of arousal sexually. I would say I completely shut off sexually.
Yeah.
But quite simply, I shut down. And I want you to kind of unpack that a little bit for me, because you're really good at like explaining that. But in my experience, as I was a teen, late teen, then dating, get married, I had a question. I had a lot of shame around. And the question is why don't I desire to kiss boys? Like, you know, my girl, the friends are out kissing, making out, doing, and I was wondering, like, I not only wasn't I doing it because I was taught that was impure, right? The purity culture could be another podcast. But I was a very sensitive and conscientious child. So what I was taught about God, I took literal, and I was taught like sexuality was basically sin or crime, right? So I was even afraid of healthy romance from that belief point. Because of my brainwashing, I didn't have the ability to allow that some of those normal romantic thoughts to even enter my mind. But when I would think, if I would be to be romantic with a boy, the thing that scared me is I didn't even have the desire. That's what I had shame around. Yeah. I only recently learned, even in conversations with you and others who are really leading these conversations today, I discovered there's a reason that I was shut off from feelings. I had went physically numb long ago, and sexually, emotionally, everything I closed off. That was my response to the violence.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I think you're hitting on something that isn't talked about a lot when it comes to the impact of spanking. I think that women's impact in purity culture, men's impact on purity culture is multifaceted in terms of like the things that the cultures we grew up in and the way in which it impacted our bodies. So sexual shutdown, repression of sexuality is a big part of these stories from different things. But I do think that spanking is one of them. And I don't think many people make that link, particularly when it's sexual shutdown. And one of the reasons I think it is one of the reasons is because how you laid out, spanking has a sexual component to it. And you're being hit on the bottom. And even if there's no arousal for the child, even if you would be like, that is the last. And I see this online. People are like, are you crazy? Are you a freak? Like, it's so not sexual. Why are people even talking about that? People get very upset in this topic for lots of reasons. But that's one of them. People get very offended. And I get why. I do know why. Like, parents who may have done it a few times, they're like, oh my gosh, how dare you say that? Like, there's so many reasons people like rise up. But I mean, I just hold out to people. Listen, like, this act of hitting a child on a bottom is inherently sexual at some level, whether the parent meant to or not. You're hitting an area that is an erogenous zone, and there's reasons that I laid out previous that it could lead to arousal. Even if it doesn't, there's something that's happening for the child. And so as you're kind of describing, some kids, like, they figure out ways to disassociate in those moments and kind of leave their body. And so if you have to leave it in a very confusing moment of a combination of love and pain, then you are shutting down parts of you. And I mean, in your case, over and over again, over the, duration of your entire childhood. And it just makes sense to me that then that has turned off parts of you, right?
Yeah, it makes so much sense.
Yeah.
That clarity has been incredible for me. So I want to take a quick second to encourage you guys to like, share, and comment here on our YouTube channel. It helps to push our channel out to reach more people, which is our goal for this show. Thank you so much. Wow. So what would you say to the kids who've had the confusion of the sexual arousal from a kid's standpoint without a lot of terms at that age yet? Like, what kind of confusion is that? And then the messaging of God, like,
Mm-hmm. Like, what would you say to the kids who are adults now, or do you just mean in general, just speaking more to that?
yeah, adults who experienced it as a kid, more or less, which is all in one, right? Because we're all recovering from what our inner child experienced. And I guess my question would be like the complexity of that messaging. Is there, yeah, anything more that you would have to share around that to those navigating? Wow, that actually really did confuse me and cause a lot of shame because I was a child and I didn't know what was happening, right?
Yeah. 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 I think I would say to what I wanted to hear for so long, and this is to kids that may have experienced some like confusing sexual feelings around it. I mean, the first thing I would say is you're not a freak, right? I think that's what I needed to hear
That's
for a long time.
yeah.
For a long time, right? Is like you are like this is a product of what happened. You are a product. You're swimming in a sea of confusion in the high control religion that you're in, and the things that have happened to you. And so I hold that out like just for kids, adult kids, maybe kids who are teenagers now who might stumble across this, whatever. You're not a freak. This is a thing that happens. And if we look at all the reasons that, I talked about previous, it makes a lot of sense why you might have, been sexually confused by these experiences. And then the second thing I would say to people who may have experienced it more like you did as a leaving the experience is that the work can begin, and this is for both of us, both my experience and yours, but is the work is hard but beautiful, and you can come home to yourself and to your body through healing. Like that's available. You had to leave home, you had to leave you. Both of us did, both me and you, in different ways in order to get through all of that. But there is beautiful ways that you can come back to yourself. And first it starts with awareness, like what we're doing today. And then secondly, through, somatic work and all of that. But I won't get too much further down that road.
Yeah, well, but that's just such a voice of hope to. I feel like there was two things when you were saying that I thought of. I thought of the shame reduction of understanding that some of our responses, which is all different, we're all different in our responses to survive harm as a child, but it was what's right about us that we, naturally our bodies we left our bodies to survive, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. And then also what you just said, and yet we can heal, we can come back home again. And that's like, wow, like it was what's right about us that we left our bodies.
Yeah, that's good.
God designed our bodies to not be able to even remotely comprehend how to process that kind of complex violence as a child.
Right.
In the name of his love. And then we come back home to our bodies again as we heal and recover, and we can learn to trust ourselves again. That's amazing.
That's really good. Yeah. You said it perfectly.
So Matt, why do folks often make child spanking a laughable humor? Like you hear, like you hear a lot of humor. You'll see it on Facebook. Like, I was spanked and I turned out amazing. I'm so grateful I was spanked. There's a lot of lighthearted humor.
Totally.
Why are we laughing about this?
Yeah. That's such an interesting question. I actually just saw someone like 2 days ago in the mall or somewhere walk by me with a shirt that said "Wooden Spoon Survivor." And I had heard of those before, but it was the first time I'd seen it in public, and I was like, buddy, what? But I think it speaks to what you just said, right? Yeah. Like, haha, so funny, made it. Which is similar to like I've seen this meme too that says, I was spanked and now I suffer from a psychological condition called respect for others, which is like this whole, like, we're making, yeah. And it makes me think of something that I read in Dr. Hillary McBride's book, Holy Hurt, where she, like, in my opinion, she's one of the best sources out there on religious trauma right now. And if you haven't read her book, I recommend it. But in her last chapter, she talks about how she talks to a man named Mark Charles, who has done a lot of work on, he's an indigenous man in the United States. And he talks about how, when he tells the story of how his people, Native Americans, were essentially like genocide happened to them, white people have this like shocked look in their eyes. And it's like they can't quite, they're traumatized by what their ancestors did. And he talked about this idea of perpetrator-induced trauma. And I promise this is all connected. But it's this idea that when you are a perpetrator, there is a kind of trauma that is connected to that. And so when I think about what spanking is and what parents have to do to their children, there is a level in which you need to come to terms with what you've done and what you need to do. Even if you've normalized the heck out of it, even if it's like the best thing ever, as now my kids like sit still in church and now they say yes sir and yes ma'am or whatever you're looking for. Like, you have to come to terms with what you've done, whether it was just light, moderate kind of spanking or very severe. You still use physical violence against a child, and so you have to somehow sanitize it. And so I think that's part of the humor. I think it's a way that we make light of something that is not a funny moment. You know, Marissa Franksburt, who's doing some really good work on this, and I'll name her at the end as a source, but she talks about that. Like, why do we laugh about such a terrible moment between the child and the parent? Even for people that are very pro-spanking, they know that whatever is happening in that moment sucks. It should suck for both of them. It's painful. You're making your child cry. It's all these things. Why is it funny? And it kind of reminds me of stand-up comedy, right? Where we have people talking about really uncomfortable topics and making us laugh about it, because how else do we talk about it?
Right.
Yeah.
I like that analogy. It makes a lot of sense. It sounds to me almost like, in short, it's a coping mechanism.
I think so. Yeah.
It's not humor at all. It's just and a lot of things that, that just goes into many other things. They talk about trauma, humor it can be a coping at so many levels of something that's under the surface, right? That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So, let's dive a little deeper now. I would love to hear you tell us a little more about what you would say. So this is another thing I often see or hear in this controversial subject where, we'll talk about the harm of child spanking, and then someone will be quick to say there's a big difference between beating or whipping a child versus spanking. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is the whole framework of Christian parenting books, whether it's James Dobson, who's been in the news all week with him passing away, whether it's, Ted Tripp, or the people who have kind of sold these ways of parenting to the last few generations. That's the whole narrative, is that we are not talking about hitting. We're not talking about beating. We're talking about spanking. We're talking about something that's loving, something that's different. Just on a kind of very definitional level, it's not different. It's a hit. It's hitting. We use language like spanking to shift perspective on what's happening. It reminds me of, in war, they use the term collateral damage for when, the bomb hit a hospital and like thousands of innocent people died, or hundreds. And they say, well, it was collateral damage. Sounds a lot better than slaughtered innocent people, right? So that's the language you'll hear even from the media. It's like, well, it was collateral damage. So at a level, spanking, hitting, same thing. We just changed language. But when it comes to this, like beating versus spanking, they are different, in a sense, and not in a good way. But the spanking thing in love is a kind of difference. And what I mean when I say different is it's a kind of screwed up mixture of love and God and ritual that a parent just losing it because they're drunk is different. I'm not going to say one or the other is worse or better, because trauma is trauma, and each person experiences trauma in a particular way, and their nervous system encodes it in a particular way. But what I will say, as somebody who was in the spanking and love camp, is that comes with its own form of effery, right? Because what you're doing is you're telling a child that this pain and harm that you're experiencing is love. This is loving. This is a good thing. And this is something that you should actually be thankful for. And like, let's hug at the end. And let's read a scripture verse together.
Yeah, you're getting me now.
Yeah, now we're in religious trauma 101, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's what this is about. This is where it gets so complex. Like, as you said, that my heart rate went up. But let's unpack that, because there is no way to separate that as a child. I feel like, is this a good time for me to give the example of the two differences I experienced in short?
Yeah, it sounds great to me. Yeah.
In short, I would say it makes more sense, and you can tell me why this is. Why does it make more sense that when I was spanked by a parent who was having an emotional outburst, that it felt better than when I was spanked more when they were in their calm demeanor? Because for me, when they were, let's say, mom's on her period and she was kind of mad, so she took it out on me. Kids know that, right?
Yeah.
Mom was pissed. Mom kind of screwed up. In my unconscious child mind, I kind of knew mom was having a moment. This is just an example. And that makes more sense than when parent is calm and it was about me. But this is what the loving thing is to do. In that place, and I experienced both placements, in that place, there was nothing for me to separate. I couldn't say, like, dad's drunk and angry.
Yeah.
It's on dad. The responsibility is on dad. I internalize everything. Not only that, it's God's fault.
Yeah. Yeah, that's heavy. And you laid it out perfectly. I think that's it. You have something that makes sense in terms of like 2 + 2 is 4. And what I mean by that is, you think of a bar fight, two guys are drunk and one guy gets a black eye. It's stupid, but it kind of makes sense to us, Both of them aren't thinking clearly. And the guy got the black eye because he, said whatever, and that's stupid, and it's violence, and it's wrong and dumb. But it's something that we can label it that. You have a label, you have language for it. We have language for the other thing, but it's a kind of language that is telling you, hey, this is loving, this is good, this is right. And then the child's going, but I had to leave my body for this, or I had a sexual confusion. And like, why would God allow that if he's good and loving? And how does this feel right in my body? Somehow I have to either do one of two things. I have to disagree with God and my parent and go, no, I've experienced sexual trauma, or I've experienced dissociation, or I need to align with God and my parent and deny my body. And that's what most people do. And that's how you get t-shirts like Wooden Spoon Survivor, I think.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot. And if you think of children, we're little, and typically children, they deny themselves because we do really want to please mom and dad.
That's right. Yeah. You have to construct a narrative to stay attached and safe. And we all do it at some level. We construct narratives about our childhood, and that's development. And that's where nostalgia comes from and all those sorts of things. That's not wrong. But the problem is when your narrative, you have to really bend over backwards to construct a narrative to make sense of everything, which I have experience doing. of saying, yeah, this all happened, but okay, I've got to make this work because
Wow.
I'm not going to tell my small group that spanking was sexually arousing, right? So somehow I got to figure this out.
Yeah, I have to talk, and nobody was connecting about that.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And that's religious trauma, right?
Absolutely. That's really good. Very, very insightful. So, do you have anything more to say about the, you say impact? The impact is the same, whether you call it one thing, spanking. You already kind of went over that, like that description of just because spanking is the religious term for beating doesn't make the impact any different. Impact is impact.
Right. And I think for all the people who might be watching and listening who are from, really conservative communities, I mean, let me just be honest. The spanking that's going on in these places are freaking beatings, just called spanking, right? Like in some places, people might say, well, I spank, and they'd maybe like, and again, I don't condone this, but they might have like, slapped their child once on their bottom for something, or like, hey, don't do that, whack, kind of thing. Not okay. But what we're talking about when we talk about spanking in very conservative Mennonite, maybe evangelical traditions, we're talking about, like using an object often. We're talking about like a child being bent over. We're talking about sometimes their pants and underwear being yanked down. We're talking about like back to back to back multiple times a day. And so while that's still under the guise of spanking, I think a lot of people listening can go, oh yeah, but like what we're talking about in my religious communities are intense and severe. And so I think I just want to name that too, to say like, this is the reality for a lot of kids in these places.
It is. It's a devastating reality. And as you shared that, I have a question again, because hearing you describe that and name it for what it was brought up another memory that was really, really hard for me to sort through as a child. And I know I'm not the only one. I swear every one of my friends who've left the Mennonite cult have shared the same thing with me. And that has been helpful for that shame reduction, just to know I wasn't the only one again, making this feeling of powerlessness. But when I was young, I got used to the multiple spankings a day, and I learned how to navigate that. My body learned how to survive, and I got good at the art of preparing myself for the next harsh moment. There's one thing I could not prepare for ever, and that was when it would happen to my siblings. And I'm an empathetic, like I said, a conscientious, very sensitive child at my core. And there was something that I couldn't protect. I couldn't go numb when that happened. It was an awful powerless feeling to hear them screaming, yelling, and the violence was loud. And I would run outside, like I'm getting anxiety as I share this, because it was absolutely powerless. I'm a child. I can't do shit about what my parents are doing because the church told them this is what you do. I ran outside. I had struggles breathing. I mean, I would be like, I literally would dissociate and hold my ears, do whatever I could to just, and then when it was over, it was almost like, again, I had to just like block it out, because I couldn't bear what my sibling was experiencing. I didn't know it was abuse then. Again, it was just what we as Christians did, but my body, I'm still recovering from what that did to me.
Yeah.
The witnessing.
It's witnessing. Yeah, secondary trauma.
So you call that secondary trauma?
Yeah, and that is so, like I hear that so much from people. And I think it's, whether it's spanking or any abuse, we like you said, we learn how to survive it in our bodies. But it's a lot harder to survive it, or sorry, not survive, but to handle whatever's going on around us in our experiences. So yeah, I think that is entirely the case for so many people. Watching it happen to someone, there's a powerlessness because you can't use the same coping strategies that you would use if it was happening to you. There's that feeling that I should be intervening potentially, or there's maybe something I should do happening for you. Yeah, that's all really heavy, and I can feel that one. Right, that one.
I would like you to share with us what you had shared with me, if you'd be up to it, about the church
Yeah. Oh, good.
experience of witness.
Yeah. Yeah. While you're sharing your story, I'm starting to feel it in my body. So I have these kind of distinct memories, and for people who grew up in conservative churches, you're going to know what I'm talking about. Church for Mennonite churches, maybe not just conservative Mennonite churches, but anywhere where kids are supposed to sit in the main service, there was this expectation that your kids just sit there and you listen and you're quiet. And because spanking was the primary way that we that was dealt with, there was a lot of spankings on Sunday mornings. And so this idea of being a secondary witness to that, I have a clear memory of an experience that happened to me. I was older already, probably 11 or 12, and there was a visiting minister in, and I remember the sermon. It just tells you about how much of this is clearly impacted in my body and in my brain. He preached that morning about how, like, the church is getting too soft. They're telling kids that Jesus loves them too much was essentially his theme. And we got to talk more about, like, their sin and their depravity, or, less about them being a promise and a possibility. I remember him kind of making fun of that song. So it's a song, and so was this, I just remember sitting there like, wow, this guy's like, he's intense.
Yeah.
He had his family with him. They were Americans from the States. And so he had adult children and they had little kids. And so he preaches this kind of sermon, and it just felt like I watched in real time the impact of a sermon like that. So his granddaughter, I guess it wasn't sitting well near the end of the service. And so her dad dragged her out back to the bathroom and just started spanking the tar out of her. And this is, again, like I earlier described, like vicious. And so I'm just listening to that. And because I've already have this really uncomfortable relationship with spanking and all of that, I'm sitting there going, oh my goodness. I'm just like, I can't believe this. Yes, I'm used to hearing this, but this one sticks in my memory because I think it was particularly harsh. And just kind of like the symbolism of what's going on all around me. And people are just like, it's just another day, right? People are chatting. And I actually remember hearing the one adult daughter say to another one, oh, sounds like so-and-so, was out for another spanking or something like that. And they laughed about it, getting to the humor. Mm-hmm. So the girl came out, crying, all of this. And then she didn't listen, so she's back in again for round 2. And this is God's house. My church's name was Bethel. Bethel means God's house in Hebrew. And like, this is the way we treat children. And this is secondary trauma for everybody in that building, even though they didn't know it. Or maybe to this day, if you talk to some of them, they'd laugh about it. I don't know what that girl would say about it now. I have no idea where she is or what her experiences are. But I know some of those people in that building would laugh about it. Yeah. But that's secondary trauma.
It's just, it grips me. It's such a, children are vulnerable, and then just even the analogy of this taking place in that house of God, like, that's really terrifying.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what a complex view of this Jesus that said to let the children come to him. I mean, when I hear you say that, I just want to run.
Yeah.
I think of that little girl, and I just want to say, run, get the hell out of that building.
Yeah. Okay.
Like
someone else where you're safe.
But when we were good little Mennonite kids, we did the opposite. We sat back on that church bench and we...
Just like that. Exactly. Yeah. You nailed it. Yeah. Don't move a muscle.
We couldn't run. There was no options.
Yeah.
And that's what this conversation is for today, is to get this out into the light, because another complex part of trauma for us particularly the religious kids, I like to think of just and I want to put it into words, validating that there wasn't options, right? Like if mom and dad and preacher man, I mean, who are you as a child to do nothing but comply?
Yeah. You have no choice.
But I want to bring hope to that by just saying, as an adult, options have saved my life.
Yeah, that's well said. That's good.
We have options today. We have resources, and that's our heart in this today, is to give words so that we can have that anatomy of choice again.
It's good. In the sense, yeah, actual autonomy, right? Yeah.
Yeah, you said it right. Yeah.
That's good.
I guess that brings us to the next question I have, Matt, around the spiritual versus non-spiritual aspect.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the story I just told is kind of, it's the picture of the way that spanking in Christian communities, corporal punishment, is a liturgy. And what I mean by that is it's like it's a part of your faith experience. It's so, you can't separate it out easily from faith. You can't separate it out from the other things that are a part of your journey. And I think that's why some people get so worried about, like, people like us who are saying spanking's not good, because they say, oh no, they're deconstructing everything. They're pulling apart all the things that I thought were true. And at some level, that's right. That's exactly what we're doing, because we're going after the way in which violence has been called good, and the way in which, like, a fearful, angry God was the framework to keep people fearful. And so, in answer to your question about spiritual versus non-spiritual, I think people who were hit or, spanked in non-Christian homes or in non-spiritual spaces have their own form of trauma to work with and deal with. But it is not the religious trauma that you and I are discussing and pulling apart, of this happening in the house of God, for example, or this happening in the name of God and in the name of love. It's like, Dad didn't believe in God, we're saying for this people over here, but Dad could get pissed. And they're like, that made sense. Dad worked he worked 80 hours. He'd get home and he'd be mad, and he shouldn't have hit us, but he did. Over here in the kind of faith spaces, they're saying, no, this is actually really beautiful. To quote Proverbs, it's like the blueness of a wound drives away sin, or something like that, paraphrased. That's a whole other kind of, horror for somebody to have to pull apart. And that's why it's way more complicated over here, because it's asking the question, what is love? Right? Like, what is love? And if love is not this, then what is it? Because I was told love is control. I was told love is pain. I was told, all these things.
Wow. That's a lot. That's really good.
Can I say one more thing to that? I think what's important in this conversation is there's a subset of people who may listen to this who are like, it only happened to me like once or twice. I grew up in a pretty like religious home, but it was very rare. It was mild. And I honestly am like, what are you guys talking about? Like, this is the first time I've even been thinking about this. And I just hold out to people in those spaces to be curious about what it is that you may have experienced, even in kind of mild forms of spanking and that sort of thing. I'm not going to name or put on anybody their trauma and story. That's your story and for you to work through. But I want to hold that out to people as like, be curious about impact. It's interesting how we've normalized things. Society as a whole has normalized things. And if there's things that like rise up for you of like, that can't be true, like I get, that's coping. There's defense mechanism. Things are happening for you. But just be curious about that. Like, I'm not trying to dismantle your childhood and tell you that you had a horrific childhood if you felt like it was beautiful and wonderful. I'm happy for you. But I want people to be aware of the ways in which there may still have been harm, particularly in the arena of spanking, and understand maybe how that plays out for you as an adult in the way that your, mental health is now, or in the way even you think about your own kids and how you're disciplining them. So just a side note I was thinking about.
Like the curiosity is the beginning of so much more awareness. So we did a post on my social media leading up to this podcast asking if any of you guys had questions around spanking and questions that come up with it. And some of you guys asked some really good questions, and today we're going to unpack them. I'm going to pick Matt's brain a little bit about your questions. We're going to start with Ruth Ann. Ruth Ann wrote, I'm watching the old Super Nanny shows from the 90s and turn of the century. I'm struggling with the representations of screaming and aggression or aggressive violent behaviors presented. I know in my head that violence/hitting is never the answer for aggressive and violent behavior. But is there no way around the hours of screaming and scratching and spitting and biting? I guess meaning from the child's view. Is there no way around the hours of it? My mother never beat us, but we also were not the scratching and spitting sort of toddlers. Doesn't it seem like 3 swats on a fully clothed behind would accomplish a little speedier progress to the relationship than the hours of screaming and dragging kids back to the naughty seats? I'm not a mother, so I might be wrong, but the show is triggering me a lot. I don't honestly know that I can say I'll ever paddle a kid again if I come up against this sort of acting out. I am so thankful I'm not a mother because I, for sure, am not equipped to deal with some of the scenes I'm watching. I participate in an active parenting discussion group by Michael Popkin. I've been telling the parents that we don't endorse striking a child under any circumstances. But how can I say this when I know I do not have the nerves to cope with dysregulated little ones? My own self. I respect Matt, and I appreciate you addressing this topic. So, Matt, what would you have to say about that?
There's so much there. I'll just say a few things. Don't love the Super Nanny show personally. It's like reality TV, and I don't even So her approach is interesting. But okay. So yeah, I would answer her question this way. Yes, it would probably be faster to hit your kid to get a compliance. That is pretty. Yeah, I think spanked kids sometimes are more well behaved in terms of at least outward ways in which they show up in the world because they're afraid. And so absolutely. I guess I'm curious about a couple things. One is, again, because she used the premise of kind of Super Nanny as the framework, Super Nanny is using families that are just really struggling, really struggling. I mean, it makes for good TV.
Yeah.
And so just even kind of hearing you were saying, just going to be I wouldn't want to be a mom. I'm there's a lot going on in these homes, far beyond violence and nonviolence. And I think that's something that gets missed in this conversation all the time, is that it becomes such a binary conversation about the kid acting up in Walmart needs to be spanked. The kid being good at Walmart clearly was spanked, and that's what's happening. That's not how the world works. It's much more complicated than that. The kid acting up at Walmart might have autism. The kid that's saying a peep in Walmart, who knows what's going on for that child? There is so many factors, and a lot of the ways that we were raised in these very simplistic spaces where it was either violence keeps kids in line, nonviolence means you're going to rob a bank. And the reality is that most people in prison have been hit. A lot of the studies done on people in jail is that they come from homes where there was violence. And so there's this, I think it really started, without getting too in the weeds on this, but there's this whole thing from probably the 70s early 70s, late 60s, around the time of the Vietnam War, when James Dobson came along and was like, we got to get our society under control because there are all these liberal hippies are out here destroying everything. And so you really had the rise of the religious right and conservatives being like, we got to get everybody under control. It really started pushing spanking again. And I think that's still what rises up in people when they see violent protests, when they see this and that. It's like, well, if we would just use violence, if we could just start spanking the kids again, you see these posts, right? We'd be okay.
Yeah.
And so let me summarize to say, kind of true with that, it's like, there's lots of ways to set boundaries for kids. Lots of ways to have like, hey, this is the way that we're kind to each other. This is the way that we, spitting in someone's face is not okay. Let me tell you about some other ways that we can express our emotions. I'm not a parenting coach. I don't claim to be one, but there are a lot of really beautiful accounts online of people doing that work, saying there are a myriad of ways to set boundaries, gently guide children without having to hit them.
That's really good, Matt. And we will be linking and sharing some good resources for those of you looking for safe ways to parent, have boundaries, teach, discipline, and communicate without violence. Because like Matt said, there's an incredible amount of information and education that we have today on that. That's so good. One thing I thought of before we move to the next question with Ruth Ann's question that came up for me, Matt, was I think about for those of us who particularly come from very rigid religious conditioning where emotions were considered pretty much altogether sinful, bad, like, silence was the dominating to get the child to stop being emotional even at 3 years old when they're just having a normal 3-year-old developmental child tantrum. I think those of us, and quote me if I'm wrong on this, but I feel like from my experience, because of the emotional suppression I experienced in the complex control I was raised under, that belief system, I do think I can resonate with Roseanne's thought process in it being very overstimulating to be around high emotion. And of course, that shows the extreme. But let's just bring an example of more like my child. I have a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old now, and he is developing. He has normal 4-year-old development where it's more black and white, and there's a whole brain, brain right, brain left, brain behind that where it's all or none, and he will cry out with what he needs, and it's very stimulating, right? And if for me as a parent, it stretches my nerves and anxiety because I didn't grow up around having conversations and options. Yeah. But I do not, physically hit my children to dominate them or to have them stop crying because I want a different path. Yeah. And I do say it's a sensory overload. And sometimes I need to step away and say, hey, give me a minute, step away, and then come back and have the conversation because of how it impacts me. Yes. And I wanted to bring that up because to change this from those of us who I would say were emotionally suppressed in silence, it can be extremely different to allow our children to express their emotions. It can stimulate what I consider things that I had been completely shut off to.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's really well said. And I think I would echo that as a parent. Yeah, I feel that. And it'll it'll trigger your nervous system in ways, right? That can work. Right. And that's very normal. And it's okay. And I don't think anyone has to feel any shame about that. That's a kind of a normal response to something feeling different or something feeling threatening, right? It's that. Yeah. Gal's acting in
I feel out of control because I was used to like we get things under control and that's the way I was programmed. Like we got to get this under control and feel comfortable, and I wasn't used to sitting with discomfort, and it just regulates me. I'm learning ways to get regulated in that process and respond and communicate. But I tell you, it's brand new for me because I didn't have it modeled. So it's
It's
not
like you have
comfortable.
to learn it in your adulthood, yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, I had to add that.
No, that's a really good addition. Yeah.
So, another question we have is from Jewel. My two issues that come to mind right now when changing models of parenting are how to view rebellion in young children and what is the place of discipline, as in a disciplined life. Obviously, there are issues for me because of the strong position I have had regarding the biblical godliness of spanking. So viewing rebellion and then where is the place of discipline?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think I have a lot of thoughts on that other than I would say I and I'm welcome. I think viewers may disagree with me on this. I don't know that rebellion is a word I would use for young children, developmentally. I think that it's hard to rebel in a developing brain. And we have to ask even, what do we mean by rebellion? Like, are we talking about normal kinds of like, I don't want to put my shoes on? Or are we talking about like, because there's a difference between I don't want to put my shoes on because I'm 3 and I want to go barefoot, and like an 18-year-old saying, I think I want to use the family car to go, do something, and then you're having that conversation. So I guess I'm just speaking to the language there, and it's probably where I would disagree. I think there's a lot of conversation around childhood development and how that plays out with Christianity. I think people, without getting too in the weeds, a lot of theology around children has come from ideas of depravity, that children are like bad sinners that you need to beat the sin out of. And so I think if you change your framework around what children actually are, image bearers rather than dirty little sinners, all of that changes in terms of the way that you think about them and your parenting. And I think
You really like that, Matt. Like the whole that just took us a little deeper as to what framework we really believe in our core about children and what we understand. That's interesting. I like that. So you guys know how passionate I am about this work, and I know so many of you guys are as well. So we offer the opportunity for you to make a contribution to the link below. The more you contribute, the more of an impact that we can make. Thank you so much. Another question is one we kind of went over already. I don't know. We'll go over it again if there's anything more to add. You need to clarify, Verlin asks, you need to clarify the difference between spanking and beating. There is a huge difference. This is not a problem limited to religious organizations, which we did go over. Is there anything more you want to add to that, Matt?
Yeah, I think we went over that. What I would say is, I agree. Like, I don't think like just religious people abuse their children. I think that it is a human problem of ego and power that we see throughout cultures and spaces. However, because of we're talking about, religious spaces in a lot of ways, we come from those. You and I have a particular spirituality still. I think that it is a particular kind of trauma. And I think we touched on that. So the spanking, booting thing, yes, I think there is a difference, like I said, and the difference sucks. The difference is that, when you get spanked in the name of love, you've got a lot of complexity that you got to deal with. So
a little more clarity potentially on a beating versus the complexity of that religious component that we name as spanking. That is interesting, and I really like that perspective. Okay. Yeah, I think we did go over that there. One more from Joyce. I'd be interested in someone addressing the intersection of neurodivergence and corporal punishment in the more conservative Anabaptist groups. Personally, and within my family, I've found EMDR is needed to unravel what never made sense to the neurodivergent brain. But I'm curious as to what a wider population may have experienced and how it's addressed.
Yeah, that is a good question. I really like that question because I think it makes me sad, number one, because I think a lot of neurodivergent kids in conservative Mennonite churches and in conservative evangelical churches suffered even more at the hands of their caregivers because there was no framework for being on the spectrum. There was no framework for sensory issues. So, I have this, I remember, so No Greater Joy, we didn't even talk about them, but that's Michael Pearl. And he had a website, and I remember reading on it, they might still have it, where people would ask parenting questions, and Michael and Debbie would basically like beat them or whatever. Like that was their framework every time because that's their philosophy. But there was one parent, yeah, and there was one parent who wrote in about their kid, and how she never wants to put her shoes on, and she doesn't like how her clothes feel, and sensory issues, clear neurodivergence. But this was back like 15 years ago, and so I just remember reading through it, and Michael Pearl's response to that mom was, this kid's will clearly still isn't broken. You need to spank until it's gone. So she talked about how her kid put her shoes on the wrong feet. And I read through it. This was while I was studying child and youth work 15 years ago. So I was just starting to understand neurodivergence and child. And I was like, I think he's saying beat an autistic child.
Oh.
And so
Yeah.
this question, yes, poor kids with autism and with any kind of sensory disorder or ADHD or, let's talk about the entire gamut of neurodiversity. There's no language for this in these places. And so they call it willful sin. And these poor kids. So yeah, EMDR, I mean, Joyce, that's the only way you're going to process the ways in which your neurodiversity, instead of being cherished and honored for that part of you, was actually seen as something to be beaten out of you. And that's really terrible.
It is terrible. And that was a good one to bring up. That just, yeah. This gives me a lot of empathy. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks guys for those questions. Yeah, I love questions. Questions are good.
Yeah.
Brings up great conversation. So Matt, what would you recommend for a better way for those who are like considering a new way of parenting through connection? Do you have any resources you recommend?
Yeah. So like I said earlier, I don't consider myself personally a parenting coach, although I enjoy thinking about childhood development and things like that. The good news about living in 2025 is that we have access to so much in terms of resources, people who are doing things differently. And so when it comes to parenting differently, a couple just people that I would recommend, if you do have access to social media, the first person I think of is Megan Hampton, and she has an account called Soul Care for Families. So this is for people of faith if you want to walk a different path. As a registered therapist, she talks a lot about development. She actually does talk a lot about corporal punishment. And her framework is one that I think a lot about when you think about a different way, which is saying, let's start with how I talked about earlier. Let's start with an understanding of kids as image bearers rather than dirty little sinners. And that moves us toward connected parenting rather than antagonistic parenting, right? It's us versus them. We're getting the sin out of them. We are dominating them. We are both image bearers on the other team, and we're moving together toward a common goal, which is living well in the world, in relationships, in the way we treat others and treat ourselves. And there's other people like her that I would recommend as well. They're doing good parenting work.
Okay. Is there any book that you have on child development that also could be, say, we're looking to understand how 3-year-old brains process, 6-year-olds, 8-year-olds, and to understand if we want to look at our kids through, like, how can I understand what they're dealing with emotionally, where their brain is, and how they process their emotions. Just really any attachment books on child development, I think, could be an incredible beginning to understand children better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Dr. Becky wrote a book called Good Inside, which I remember when some Christians hate that title because they think, you're a sinner. we're going to start with Image Bearer. It Works. She's got good stuff. So if you look her up online and read her book, Good Inside, it's all about that, the things you kind of described. We have a little person with all this potential who's developing. She's also really good to speak to just the different discipline challenges that parents might run into, and the way that she's coming from the framework of, a developing brain, about a kid who has potential, who is not trying to manipulate you, who is, all the things that you may have as a framework. Her stuff's really good for parenting, and she's online as well, and you could follow her online. I also think Gabor Mate is good, and he's not.
Him.
Yeah, I think, and most people in our spaces are like, you kind of have to. Some people didn't, but a lot of people. I've seen him talk in person, and he's not a parenting coach, but he's holistic, and he talks about, essentially from birth until death, mental health and attachment. And his stuff, I would recommend his latest book, The Myth of Normal, is so good because it just covers, it's kind of a culmination of all his work. And the study I actually referenced earlier today, the Harvard one from 2021, he does talk about in one of his chapters on childhood. He's got a whole book on ADHD, Scattered Minds, which is really beautiful. His approach on addictions. And so that stuff is parenting stuff in my mind. I think if you can, if you can understand the human condition, I think you can understand parenting. And it's less about, parenting coaching is wonderful. And I think that's good for the nitty gritty day to day. If you're like, I don't know what to do if my kid's like this, or et cetera, et cetera. But, the more that we understand ourselves, and the more that we understand the human condition, what it is that we need, our embodied self, the more that we can look at these little people and think about connection and attachment, I think.
I love that, Matt. Wow. That is a lot. It's not so much about controlled behavior, but understanding who we are as humanity. And I think that just is a whole different approach. Wow. I like the whole brain child. Did you ever read the book, The Whole Brain Child?
Yeah,
that's another good name.
That's a good one.
I learned a few things reading that I was like, oh, so that's what my 3-year-old was thinking.
Yeah.
It really reduces anxiety when you're a parent trying to change these, parenting dynamics, understanding my children. I'm brand new baby at this. And I was like reading that book the other day and reading where my boys' age is. And I was like, wow, education is so powerful because that brings clarity. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's great.
Thanks, Matt. We'll go ahead, and for you guys that are interested, when I launch this podcast, I'll link all kinds of good content that Matt recommends that we have on that, where you guys can pick and choose what you might want to dive into for more education. Matt, is there a place that we can have the audience connect with you on social media, as well as your coaching, if they'd like to reach out for any type of connection with you?
Yeah. So I'm on Instagram at shantz.nat, to my name backwards, which is you can DM me on there. I spend, that's my predominant social media space. And then my website, which is www.mattshantz.org. So it's just my name.org. There's a connect with me button on there, which is just my email, which is a really easy place to get a hold of me as well. Of course, I'm on Facebook still. So if that's the place you want to DM me on or find me there, absolutely as well. So those 3 spaces are probably the easiest places to get a hold of me. My website is my coaching space. So if you're interested in any kind of support, like I talked about at the beginning, then just shoot me an email on there and I can set you up with a free consultation.
Good. Okay. And that will be linked here under our podcast as well. You'll be able to find Max Social's website and connect if you would like to have more conversation and things that you related to from these insights. Matt, thank you so much for just coming today and bringing these insights, your experiences and passion with us.
Yeah, thanks, Angela. Super fun to be here. I loved it. And thanks for providing kind of a safe place to talk about all this.
Absolutely. Guys, I'd love for you guys to hit the subscribe button so that you can be notified for future episodes, as well as leave comment below for our guests. We love to hear back from you. Our guests often read down through the comments, so leave a comment. Let us know the feedback that you resonate with the most, and just give a shout out to our guests that share their stories. You can also find the Angela Rose Show on Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram, so be sure to follow us on all social media platforms. And thank you so much for your support.